Well, welcome everybody to our online program on addiction and recovery from the Sunshine Coast Health Centre up here in Powell River, BC. And this program will talk about relapse. It's kind of an interesting idea to pursue. Why would anyone who gets into recovery or who makes some kind of decision to quit the drug return to the drug? At one level, it makes no sense at all. I remember even a few years ago, our local government here thought it would be the solution to addiction was to build a bunch of places where addicts could detoxify. And they thought once they detoxified, then somehow, presumably, some kind of natural instinct or something would happen, and that would be the end of the drug problem. Well, if you've watched the television or read any magazine or newspaper, you know that the relapse rate is pretty substantial in the field. In fact, some people say relapse is a natural part of the recovery process, and some people even say an expected part of the recovery process. In any case, the numbers get tossed around all over the place. I was watching a documentary. It said 80% of people go through treatment, relapse. I've read 90%. All sorts of numbers that keep flying around, depending on how long afterwards they've studied these people, of course. But anyway, relapse is significant, and so it's important to get some idea of what's going on. And if you go through the literature, these experts who talk about relapse, it's kind of interesting because they come up with all sorts of different ideas. One of the most famous ones today is that is based on brain chemistry and argues that addiction is a compulsion. Okay, and so basically relapse has something to do with this brain chemistry creating these cravings which are so irresistible. People have a tough time dealing with them, and so use the drug to get rid of the cravings. That's a pretty popular one today. Other people, Todd Kashdan did an interesting study, and this wasn't so much on relapse, but what he noticed with the people who consumed a lot of the drug, in this case alcohol, was that they had a tough time figuring out what they were actually feeling. And we've talked about this idea before in the online program, where if someone says, well, I feel kind of crappy today, chances are they'll go get loaded. On the other hand, if someone can detail exactly what they're feeling, oh, I feel bad today because I was rude to Harry, and geez, I shouldn't have been, I was just in a bad mood, and geez, I should go apologize to him, then those people don't consume as much of the drug. In other words, making sense of what you're feeling is a way of overcoming the drug use. So in terms of relapse, this may be people who've gone through treatment or even decide to clean up on their own, and then they're faced with this deep feeling, and they just can't make sense of it. That's kind of an interesting idea. Other people might say, oh, well, the reason people relapse is faulty thinking. They really haven't quite figured out that the way their mind works is not really working that well. And maybe they're thinking, well, geez, I'm getting a craving. Oh, this is so terrible. Oh, I can't handle it. Oh, I got to do something. Maybe they're thinking like that. Other people who've dealt with relapse prevention have suggested maybe, in addition to the bad thinking, maybe we'll add in the feelings and some behaviors, and we'll put it in a big sort of mishmash, and they're all feeding off each other, and this leads to relapse. And some people, of course, we've talked about this one before, it's like the bell rings and you just do drugs. It's just in psychology we call this a conditioned effect. We don't even think, we just react. It's similar to that idea we've talked about before about Pavlov and his dogs, right? Ring the bell, give the dog food, ring the bell, give the dog food. And very often the dog will just expect the food after hearing the bell, even though there's no food coming. Right? So this conditioned response. Okay, I get a craving or I get triggered, bang, I start using drugs. Anyway, all sorts of different ideas going on. Anyway, I thought we'd spend some time looking into some of these ideas and just to present them to you. Okay, so the first one is the scientific argument based on the addiction is all about the effect of the drug hitting the brain, this chemical reaction that occurs when the drug gets into the brain. Okay, and there are various arguments posed about this one. So, for example, one of the arguments is, particularly with stimulants, is that this part of the brain, this is called the thinking part of the brain. It's probably a little more complicated than that, and quite controversial, but it's a fairly mainstream argument that this controls, planning, and it allows us to predict consequences, and basically what it does is it prevents us from acting impulsively. So one of the arguments about, particularly again, stimulants such as amphetamines or cocaine, is that it disrupts this part of the brain. So basically, well, I can't think straight anymore. My thinking patterns have been disrupted because of the drug use, and therefore, when I'm faced with a craving or something because I can't think very well, then I just jump back into the drug. Okay. Just recently, I was reading an article published this year where these neuroscientists, these brain scientists, have made the argument that because of this disruption in this part of the brain, they propose that this is the reason why most people with addiction problems don't ask for treatment, basically because they're not thinking clearly. Okay, so that's one. Another one is the pleasure center of the brain's disrupted. If you were a client at the Sunshine Coast Health Center, you learned all about the nucleus accumbens and this pleasure, the pleasure argument. So one of the arguments is that the brain disrupts the pleasure center of the brain, this thing called the nucleus accumbens, and it disrupts in such a way that the brain doesn't know when it's satisfied, when it's satiated, so it just keeps wanting more and more. That's another argument. Another argument is the anticipation. We've talked about this one before. The argument that the power of drugs is that the person anticipates the reward of the drug. Before they've even had the drug, it's just the anticipation is the key piece. So it may be that people in recovery remember, what the drug experience was like, and so they've been conditioned into this, and their brains have been adapted to it, and so then they go for it, right? Once this anticipation hits, or even the last one, and probably the most famous now, is this idea of what's known as motivational wanting, where when you use a drug, it sensitizes a certain part of your brain, and therefore when it triggers cravings, and they're irresistible. Not even thinking can get out. And so people will use drugs even if they don't want to, even if they don't get pleasure for them, they'll just use them. And this idea of the sensitizing the brain is generally held up pretty highly because it explains why a lot of people, addicts, tell us they do drugs even though they don't want to or don't experience pleasure for them. So it's very odd. So you can think that someone in recovery, let's say they've been triggered, and then somehow, bang, this irresistible urge takes over, and regardless of what they think or what they feel, they're going to do the drugs anyway. So these are four of the more famous brain chemistry arguments. And again, dealing with this whole concept of compulsion, and the compulsion is always based on the idea that you're going to do a behavior, it's going to be compulsive without thought or consideration of consequences, anything like that, right? Because it's almost an irresistible urge. Anyway, that's it for this program. We'll be back next time with another topic in our Relapse series.